Welcome everybody to the Solar World Congress 50. This is session 1. You already all very nicely held the line, so we are now ready to actually start the live session. So once again, thank you for joining us today. We are very pleased to have all of you here, and we are certainly all of us are very happy and very ready to kick off this event with you today. My name is Arabella. I am the Communications and Outreach Officer here at the ISES HQ in Freiburg, Germany. And it is now my great pleasure to introduce to you our session introducer, who is Geoff Stapleton. Geoff is the ISES treasurer for many years now, and he's one of our 2 ISES board members. He's also the managing director of Global Sustainable Energy Solutions, and he's been certainly one of the driving forces behind the Solar World Congress 50 ever since the idea was born several years ago. So Geoff, I'm now happy to hand over to you for a few introductory words. Thank you.
Welcome to SWC 50, the Century of Solar Celebration Virtual Conference. This is session 1, which is the welcome and the overview of the Century of Energy Transformation. I am Geoff Stapleton, one of the SWC 50 organisers. 12 months ago in Chile, I invited everyone to Melbourne, Australia. However, we all know why we are not there. However, it is not stopping the ISES celebration continuing. For over 60 years, the members of ISES have undertaken technical research, product development and advocacy for the growth of solar and renewable energy. Discussion of what needs to happen over the next 50 years, with the emphasis on the next 10 years. Through this conference and the related ongoing online museum and booklet, ISES aims to provide resources to help us all accelerate the transformation to a 100% renewable energy world. We'd like to thank our platinum partners, SWC from Australia and NREL from USA, and our gold partners, Smart Energy from Turkey, and all our supporters who are listed in the booklet and museum online after the conference. This session, as all of the sessions in this virtual conference, addresses an important aspect of the energy transformation. Our session moderator is Lawrence Kazmerski, famous for the ties like I'm wearing here at the moment, and I think a few other people have on. Lawrence Kazmerski, or Kaz as he's commonly known, is Emeritus Research Staff Member of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Colorado, and currently he is a research professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder, with the Renewable and Sustainable Institute, RASA, as well. Kazmerski's 50-year professional career in solar energy includes serving as the founding director of the National Center for Photovoltaics between 1999 through to 2008. I'll now hand over to Kaz for moderating the session.
Thank you very, very much, Geoff. And this is truly long distance, from Australia to the US to Europe and everything. So we want to welcome everybody out there, and I hope that this all goes well now for you. And our major focus here is to really look in at this lineup of speakers. And as Geoff said, is that this session is focused on looking back over this 50 years and also looking forward over the next 50 years. And I think we have a group of people here who can very, very well address these subjects. So our first speaker in this session, okay, is Klaus Vajen, who just happens to be the president of ISES right now on this, having taken over this activity this year. Klaus is the director of the Institute of Thermal Engineering at the University of Kassel. I think everyone can read these things, so I'm not going to go through every aspect of these short bios. But certainly Klaus, I think in my observations, has been very active with ISES on the education side. and has brought in various aspects of education type things, even to the Solar World conferences, the ability, for instance, to get credit toward a master's degree in this. So I think, if I heard this correctly, that Klaus is coming to us to this virtual presentation virtually on this thing, and has a video that will be played now. So let me turn this over to Klaus.
Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction. Yeah, International Solar Energy Society. Who are we? We are NGO, non-profit, and we were founded already in 1954. And our members are quite diverse. There are some person, but also institutions and businesses. And it's also quite diverse regarding origin. So our members come from all around the globe, and also our national sections are there. And what do we do? Beside others, we issue scientific journals. We organize and host international conferences, and we try to spread knowledge about solar energy and renewable energies in general, and several further things. So Renné is going to talk about this later, and just Yogi Goswami about the publications. So I would like to focus now on this conferences and education issue. One major point are the ISES webinars, so that they take place monthly. And we started already 2012, which was rather early with regular webinars. And so far we had more than 16,000 participants who were informed or informed themselves about solar energy related topics. And we cooperate there also with very famous global active institutions like IEA, SHC and REN 21, so and some others. If you are interested in these webinars, you may sign up for the mailing list under ISES.org. The other things are the conferences, and this started 1970 in Melbourne. That's the reason why we have now our SWC 50, just 50 years after, and also organized from and by Melbourne.
Apologize, everyone. We appear to be having a...
This was the official announcing of this conference, 1970, and you see that our fees at that time were quite reasonable. But although ISES was, from the ecological point of view, probably far ahead of the rest of the society, regarding gender issues, there is still some place left for improvement, at least 1970. This continued then, the next conference, 71, and from then on, it was always every second year and always in odd years. So 81 we are already, 83, 87 was the Solar World Congress in Hamburg. It was the largest Solar World Congress regarding participants and a number of papers. And yeah, I want to mention that because it influenced me also personally quite a lot. It was my first international congress at that time, and it formed the motivation of the whole generation of German renewable energy researchers. And so it is a very good example how important it is to change location, to go through the world and to support researchers and politicians in all places of the world, and to motivate especially the young scientists to see renewable energies as their specialty they want to work on their lifetime. And I personally was inspired by this conference, and once again, a lot of other German researchers I know from my age that had the same experience. So we continue. A burst in Japan, once again in Denver. 93 was the first and so far only Solar World Congress in Eastern Europe, in Budapest. And that was obviously so important for Hungary that the Hungarian Post even issued a stamp for the Solar World Congress. This was probably the only stamp which was issued for an ISES conference. We were in Africa, 95 already, and 96 started something new. And you see here, 96, we learned that the Solar World Congresses are in odd years and even years. There started this Eurosun conference series, also every second year, but in even years. And you see these pictures of the main organizers, and the woman in the middle is has been the Minister of Environment of the federal government of Germany, but perhaps you still know her as one of the most influential politicians so far. She's quite active also today. '97 was the first Congress in Korea and Jerusalem. And Copenhagen, we started with another innovation, and these are the master courses. So master courses are that we group students internationally to groups of 2, and they get one topic of a conference and shall follow all the presentations, and at the end report to all the other students about the findings of their topic, respective topic. And this leads to quite an international experience for them. They feel much more self-confident if they are at these conferences. And they usually, even at the closing ceremony, they report to the audience what they learned during these congresses. This works since 2000 so well that we are going to implement that for the Solar World conferences also, starting probably in India 23. Glasgow is another thing that Young ISES, that was founded was founded at an ISES board meeting in India, but the first conference where we applied, especially Young ISES meeting, invited young people to these conferences and to join us prior to the conferences was in Glasgow, at the Eurosun in Glasgow. And there we informed these young people about ISES. We support them in networking. We try to explain how conferences work. So that's all these issues to support and to stimulate young people to attend the conferences and to feel really good there. Sometimes they even make own parties, Young ISES parties at these conferences. 27, we were in China, and 29 in Johannesburg. So one of the traditions of ISES is that the flag of ISES is handed over from the actual host to the next one. The next was in Santiago de Chile. This was one of the first one in South America. And here we introduced another new measure, especially for young people, and that was the so-called solar speed dating. So where young people, PhD students mainly, could meet for 20 minutes at a small table with an experienced researcher and ask all questions they ever wanted to ask. And after 20 minutes, it was changed. They were again mixed up, and they were put to another table, to another expert. So this should decrease the barrier to approach experienced researcher at these conferences and furthermore stimulate the networking of the young researchers. And that worked so well that we want to establish that for all upcoming ISES conferences now. So now the next Congress, due to reasons everybody knows, is somewhere in the cloud. So the Solar World Congress 2021 won't be at a specific location, but just virtual. The next Eurosun 2022 is hopefully will be on ground, maybe not in the North Atlantic, but somewhere here in Europe. But there is something new. And so ISES and the Solar Heating and Cooling Program of IEA, of the International Energy Agency, we want now to host this Eurosun together. We want to organize it together. So far was it organized by ISES and ISES Europe, and now we're going to do that together with IEA SHC. From now on, the first time will be 22. And 2023 is already fixed. That should be in New Delhi, where it was originally planned 21, but we postponed it this by 2 years. So this is already fixed. You see, that's a quite variety. We were almost all over the world so far. And we are really proud that we were able to stimulate several countries with the idea and with renewable energies. Just so far, it was a really amazing success stories. We had more than 12,000 scientific publications on these conferences. But COVID-19 and this Fridays for Future changed a lot. So what is the future of conferences? Is it hybrid? Or will we still meet traditionally only? Or will it even be something like augmented reality? But if it's a global conferences, not regional ones, if they're global conferences, then it's a deal, not easy to deal with the different time zones. We realized this already here at the SWC 50 conference. So at my place, it's just 6 o'clock in the morning at the moment. This is usually not the time where I attend conferences. And another issue this might influence is especially ecologically oriented researchers. What about long distance traveling and climate change? And we are sure that also future generation will need intense exchange of ideas, and ISES will be very happy to initiate, support, and enable this communication towards 100% renewable energies. Thank you for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you in one of the upcoming sessions, or even additionally in one of the upcoming ISES conferences. Thank you.
I think I'm on here as we're turning over. So thank you very, very much, Klaus, for this look at the ISES development. And I think the idea is join ISES and see the world on this whole thing. So, hey, our next speaker was the last president of ISES on this whole thing. He reigned from 2010 to 2019, a span that some other presidents around the world would like to have a span like that. I'm just going to say that I know Dave going back to our days together. We were colleagues at CIRI and NREL together. Dave headed the resource assessment things. That's where his technical career, where he grew up. Okay, and he is also a person who is very dedicated to the 100% renewable energy goals that ISES and now a lot of organizations in the world have adopted. So let me turn this over to Dave.
Well, thank you very much, Larry, for your kind introduction. And thanks to Klaus for his comments as well. And I see Arabella will be handling my slides for me. So, and thank you, Larry, also for your beautiful tie. So ISES is a membership-based organization, as Klaus just explained, that for years has been serving the solar energy community by promoting R&D and innovation in solar technologies. And so now as these technologies have become commercially successful, the Society also focuses on advocating for and advancing solar energy research and deployments with the goal of achieving 100% renewable energy worldwide, used efficiently and wisely as a way to address the urgent climate crisis and to provide energy, economic, and environmental security to all. And this is why we've launched SWC 50. A couple of years ago, a few of us on the ISES board of directors, some of who are in this seminar right now, were reflecting back on our history. Back in 1954, key solar energy leaders and proponents around the US formed the Association for Applied Solar Energy, or AFASE. Perhaps not so coincidentally, that was the same year that Bell Telephone Laboratories patented the first commercial solar cell. ASAFE changed its name to the Solar Energy Society in the early 1960s and continued its advocacy and support for solar energy research, development, and deployment, and reporting on its work through scientific conferences and technical publications. And then later in that decade, representatives from Australia, and in particular the Australian New Zealand Solar Energy Society, or ANZES for short, invited the SES board to jointly organize the first International Solar World Congress. The successful Congress is ultimately held in Melbourne, Australia in March 1970. And following this landmark event, the SES also found a new home in Australia, developed a new charter, and changed its name to the International Solar Energy Society. So based on this history, we felt it was appropriate to celebrate the 50th anniversary of this first World Congress, and also to use the occasion to look forward to the next 50 years of phenomenal growth in solar and renewable technologies. Today, we can be proud of the tremendous success that these technologies have in the marketplace and the ever-growing role they are playing in meeting our end-use energy demands. But first, here's a little bit more about our ISES history. So Arabella, if they change to the next slide, please. When ISES was formed in 1970, both ANZES and the American Solar Energy Society, or ASES, which was a successor to the Phoenix-based SES, became the first two sections of ISES. The concept of national sections having a formal affiliation with ISES quickly caught on, and within a few years, dozens of organizations around the world, some already serving their countries as nonprofit solar and renewable energy societies, applied to ISES to become official sections. And eventually, over 60 countries have been or currently are represented by official ISES sections, many of which continue to operate to this day and maintain a relationship with ISES. I am pleased to note, for example, that ASES is an official supporter of SWC 50. During these formative years, ISES also launched the Solar Energy Journal, which you will hear about more from our next speaker, Professor Yogi Goswami. And Klaus has already discussed, as he saw, how there have been very successful Solar World Congresses held every 2 years since 1970. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about partnerships. Recently, ISES has been placing strong emphasis towards developing key partnerships with other global organizations. These partnerships provide ways for ISES to support the technical content of the partners' programs, while at the same time putting ISES at the table of global leaders who are actively engaged in the renewable energy transformation. And here are some examples you can see on this slide. ISES is on the steering committee of REN21 and helps provide content and review of REN21's annual global status reports. ISES is a founding member of the Global Solar Council and serves on its board of directors. ISES is a partner with an organization called the Renné Alliance, which includes the World Wind Energy Association, the World Bioenergy Association, the International Hydropower Association, and the International Geothermal Association. Among other activities, the Renné Alliance regularly organizes a side event at the annual UNFCCC climate conferences, or COPs as they are known. ISES has been involved with a number of these activities of the International Renewable ISES has been involved with a number of activities of the International Renewable Energy Agency, or IRENA, and is currently a member of the Coalition for Action, where we contribute to reports coming out both from the Towards 100% Renewable Energy Group and the Community Power Group. And ISES is currently a sponsor of the International Energy Agency's Solar Heating and Cooling Technology Cooperation Program and serves on its executive committee. These are just examples of our many partnerships. So if you go to the next slide. Another area of focus is the development of infographics that serve as communication tools for the broader public. The first set of infographics was released in late 2018, and they were designed to dispel myths and misunderstandings about renewables and the grid. They offered 8 simple to understand graphics with accompanying text on issues such as the 3 examples I've shown here. I know they're a bit hard to read, but please go to the website to see these in detail. One is how the effects of variable renewable energy can be managed in the grid. Another one, how the grid can safely handle high penetrations of wind and solar. And a third one, how load matching phenomena such as the duck curve, where the load increases late in the day as the sun is setting, can be managed effectively by grids with built-in flexibility. And then below that, on the second set of infographics, which were made available in late 2019, they focuses on the potential of solar thermal heat. A number of solar thermal technology applications are being implemented today, and these infographics provide insights into future technological developments. 3 specific examples were published, as you can see at the bottom of the slide. And a key message from these examples is that in many parts of the world, the transformation of the energy system has mainly focused on the electricity sector, whereas the heating and cooling, transport, industrial, and agricultural sectors are often overlooked. Yet approximately half of our final end-use consumption is in the heating and cooling sector. So we developed these infographics to provide a focus on sector integration as a way of meeting all of our end-use requirements with renewables. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So looking forward, although in many places around the world, wind and solar technologies are now the most cost-effective way of adding new capacity to the electricity grid, much work still needs to be done in the energy transformation, and it needs to be done urgently. The global emission of anthropogenic carbon dioxide continues to increase despite a recent decrease due to the economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, showed that the world must establish a global warming target of no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade to avoid consequential human and ecological disruptions. However, that 2018 report also shows that roughly 2/3 and perhaps as much as 3/4 of all of the carbon dioxide emissions that would result in this warming have already been emitted into the atmosphere since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So this means that at current rates, we will reach the cumulative emission levels that can result in a 1.5 degree C warming within a decade unless urgent action is taken. This action requires reducing our anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions to around 0 by mid-century. And for the energy sector, this means that the deployment of clean, renewable energy technologies must increase at a much greater pace than what is currently happening around the world in order to avoid an impending climate crisis. And we'll be discussing this more in greater depth in session 6 of this conference. So ISES is looking forward to the next half century of renewable energy progress to meet this challenge and to achieve a 100% renewable energy future. Specifically, our activities will focus on 7 key topical areas, which are also outlined in Chapter 12 that's in the booklet that accompanies SWC 50 and that Geoff will talk about at the end of this session. Let me highlight these 7 points here. ISES will advocate for R&D to support technology innovations to further reduce investment risks and enhance project variability. ISES will support specific enabling policies that can advance the energy transformation and will broaden our communication to our stakeholders and to the public, and develop educational programs that focus on building an equitable and sustainable energy transformation. ISES will expand our Young ISEX activities to encourage much broader participation in the energy transformation by young people. ISES will continue to engage with and support our international partners, and ISES will commit to ensuring that all ongoing and future ISES programs embrace justice, equity, diversity, and inclusivity, or what we call the JEDI principles. Through the 6 distinct online sessions of this 2-day conference, you will see firsthand case studies as to how the transformation is already unfolding. You'll learn more about how R&D is improving the efficiency, durability, and reliability of these technologies, and about which regional national policy initiatives are working and what new policy and financing mechanisms are being put in place to improve the investment environment and competitiveness of these technologies. And you'll learn about how the energy producing sector is responding to the demands for a carbon-free system by taking innovative steps toward a more resilient, reliable, and flexible energy supply, which in turn will bring universal energy access and independence, and economic stability, and a healthy environment to our global society. So thank you for your participation and attention. And now I'll turn the podium back over to Larry.
Hey, thank you very, very much, Dave, for that look backwards all the way to the 1950s through now, and a little bit forward as well. As the audience probably saw, because I'm so transparent, that we are going to have a little change in the program now. We're going to go and turn this over now to Dr. Paulo Frankl. I think that many people here listening know Paulo because he's been working in certainly for 30 years on the renewable energy area, and certainly since 2007 has been with the IEA, the International Energy Agency. And I think Paulo is going to be able to tell us, look at 1970 through 2070, the century of energy transformation, looking at the IEA perspectives on this. So, Paulo?
Thank you, Larry. If I now, yes, show my screen, this is fantastic. And then I hope this works. Arabella, if you can confirm that you are seeing my screen correctly. Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you very much to ISES and the organizers to invite the IEA and myself to share with you very few data indeed on this century of energy transformation, and I will speak very briefly about the past, the present, and the future. So if you go back to the 970, the power mix was basically done 40% by coal, 25% roughly by hydro, and a little bit of bioenergy, a little bit of nuclear at that time, and then the rest was oil. Now, if you look at the next 20 years until 1990, this is the offtake of nuclear programs in the world, in US, Japan, France, in several places. And indeed, you can see that in the mid of 90s, coal was still at 40% of the power mix, but nuclear and the hydro did basically the rest. And then you have another period of 20 years, which unfortunately augmented the share of fossil fuels, both of coal and of natural gas until 2010. And then starting from 2005 with wind. And then basically after 2010, you see wind and solar PV emerging. And 2020 is a milestone because for the first time, low carbon electricity, including nuclear, surpasses coal. That's the past. Now, the present is in the next 5 years is this. These are the total capacities of hydro, natural gas, coal in the world. And this is what is happening with wind and PV in the next 5 years. So basically, the capacities of wind and PV will double in just 5 years and will surpass coal by 2024. I remind you that this coal capacity needed 80 years, 80, to be built, and in the next 5 years, wind and PV will surpass. And that's the future. In a sustainable development scenario, this is the one of the scenarios run by the IEA, you can see very clearly the role of solar, taking all renewables to having the big majority of power systems in the world according to our scenarios. In 2050, the renewables account for 80% of electricity generation, and in 2070, it goes up to 87%. This is in terms of generation. Solar becomes the first source of electricity, followed by wind and then hydro. But as Dave correctly said, the problem is not the electricity. The problem is the rest. And unfortunately, in the rest, if you look at the statistics between 71 and 2018, nothing has happened very much. In 71, the fossil fuels were roughly 85% of the total primary energy supply. And in 2018, also now, it's still more than 80%, because as Dave correctly said, the heating part and the industry and the transport part are often overlooked. So what kind of strategies do we have here for the future? One is obviously the electrification of other end users, and such like electric vehicles in the transport case. The direct use of solar heat, either with low temperature, medium temperature of solar thermal heat, or through solar concentrators. And then there is another option, which opens completely new opportunities, which is the production of renewable hydrogen and synthetic fuels. And here what you see in this map are the long-term hydrogen production costs from solar and wind systems that open really completely new opportunities to have another fuel, this time chemical, clean, based on renewables that can come from many countries and regions in the world, notably from Africa. I will stop it here, and of course, I welcome any questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Paulo. I'll point out to the audience out there that you can ask questions via the question tab on this thing that comes up. Some people have put on some personal questions on here, but if you put them on there, we will address these at the end of the presentations on this, so that if you have questions, put them on and we'll get to as many of them as we can in our allotted time. So I think now we progress and on to another past presidents. That's past, P-A-S-T, not P-A-S-S-E-D on this. And this is Yogi Goswami. Yogi I have known for quite a while as well on this, have been able to work with him on. He's almost your one-shop stop for solar energy. And I think much of the community knows Yogi because Yogi has been serving as the editor-in-chief of the ISES publication, Solar Energy, published by Elsevier on this whole thing. And Yogi has also been very active in educational aspects of ISES as well. So let me turn this over to Yogi.
Okay, let me share my screen. Thank you, Kaz, for that introduction, and also for sending me this tie just yesterday so I could wear it for you and show it to everyone what nice ties you design. Can you guys see my screen?
Yogi, if you could put it into the full screen mode, please.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, there we are.
Okay, so Solar Energy Journal is extremely important for the International Solar Energy Society, mainly because it provides a major part of the income, but it has also been very important for the society, for the whole world, because this is the journal that brought the information that was needed for researchers and for the industry all the way from 1957. The first Congress was held in Phoenix, Arizona in 1955. And right at that Congress, they started talking about bringing the information to the rest of the world. And that's where the idea of the journal was born. But the first issue was published in January 1957. And the title of the journal was the Journal of Solar Energy, Science and Engineering, with Jean Jensen as the editor. And I think Jean Jensen was a librarian at the Arizona State University who took on the job of publishing the issue. And this is the picture of the cover of that first issue. As you can see, it came from Steve Sargent, who used to work for the US Department of Energy. I was missing the first maybe 15 years of the issues, and Steve was very kind to send me all of his early issues. So I have a complete library now of all the issues of the journal, right starting from January 1957. However, in 1958, you see the difference. It started as the Journal of Solar Energy, Science and Engineering. Now the title was Solar Energy, the Journal of Solar Energy, Science and Engineering. And it was being published by the Association for Applied Solar Energy. And actually, it was really being published at the Arizona State University. So in 1958, Alfred Stafford became the chief technical editor and appointed 4 associate editors. They wanted to publish this journal quarterly, but they could only manage to publish 3 issues per year. So fast forward 1964, you see the change in the look of the journal. Now solar energy becomes much bigger than the byline, which is the Journal of Solar Energy, Science and Engineering. And at this point, it's not the Association for Applied Solar Energy, it's Solar Energy Society. And I want you, you probably can't read this, but in addition to the editor, now is Charles Scarlett, he has a publications committee, and it's the names on this in the publication committee that become very important. Has names of Dr. J.A. Duffy, Jack Duffy, Andrew Drummond, Peter Glazer, Eric Farber. So the first 3 that I mentioned, they become the editors later on. And Eric Farber was a person who moved from the University of Wisconsin to University of Florida. And when he retired in 1989, I took over his position at the University of Florida as director of the Solar Energy Lab. So then 1967, the look of the journal still remains the same, but the editor, okay. So the editor is still Charles Scarlett, but now you see the names John Yellett and Valentin Baum from Russia and Maria Telkis. All of these have played a very important part in the early part of the literature of solar energy. In fact, it was so interesting when I started looking into these journals and the articles written initially for this presentation, that all of the pioneers that you read in the books, they were writing their papers at that time, and they were papers coming from all over the world, not just from North America, but from Europe, from India, from Israel, from Japan, from Australia. Okay, at this point, Andrew Drummond became the editor. It's interesting to note that all of these people that I'm mentioning up to this point, that they were all at Arizona State University. Fast forward to 1971. Oh, the face of the journal changes. And at this point, it's Solar Energy Big, and then the Journal of Solar Energy Science and Technology. Science and Technology is small letters, and it says the International Solar Energy Society, and the new publisher, Pergamon Press. The reason was that this journal was really a drain on the finances of the society. Society did not have much finances anyway. So the idea was that let's give it to a publisher to publish, and hopefully that will give some income to the society, which it started giving, but not very much. Even though Pergamon Press started in 1971, the first issue they published was actually 1972. Now the editor is Peter Glaser, and they published 4 issues in 1972. Peter Glaser remained editor till 1985. So 1985, there's slight change in the look of the journal, but at this point, the associate editors, there's 8 of them, and the editor-in-chief is Jack Duffy from the University of Wisconsin. So 12 associate editors, excuse me. And the journal expanded a lot, includes solar collectors, solar radiation, solar thermal, thermal storage, passive solar, photochemistry, photovoltaics, wind, and biomass. And by the way, photovoltaics started becoming big at that point. Earlier, it was a very small part. And Kaz, you might remember Tom Surek, who was with you at SERI at that time, Solar Energy Research Institute. He became the associate editor for photovoltaics. And several special issues started publishing at that point. Elsevier acquired Pergamon Press in 1991. Okay. So this is how Elsevier became the publisher. So 1993, the editor-in-chief became Terry Hollins from Canada. Okay. And Terry Hollins, again, added a few associate editors. And research in Europe became big, and so he also had a European editor. There were 12 associate editors at that point, and he added areas of architecture and design and simulations, and an associate editor that would later become the editor of the journal. So this is in 1999. And at this point, the editor is Professor Joachim Luther, who then became the director of Fraunhofer Institute for Solar Energy in Freiburg. So Joachim Luther had 21 associate editors and added areas of economics and policy into the journal. So this is the journal that is the most comprehensive at this point in terms of the topics that it covers. So Joachim Luther remained editor until 2002. So in 2002, I took over as the editor-in-chief, and there were some reasons for that. There were 24 associate editors, but the reason was that the journal was not doing very well at that time. Now, the journal has had history of ups and downs throughout. There were times in the past that the society felt they could not continue to publish because they could not afford this journal. It was costing them money. Then when Pergamon Press came on, then it started becoming profitable because they were getting some funds from the publisher. Elsevier took over. But Elsevier then, because we were not meeting the targets or we were not meeting the goals, actually threatened to cancel the contract. In fact, they said that a year after 2002, they will actually cancel the contract for this journal, and so the society will be on its own to publish. So this is what happened then from 2002 onwards. In 2002, we published only 496 pages of the journal. Our contract with the publisher was for 1,800 pages for the whole year. So you can see why Elsevier, at that point, we were not even publishing 1/3 of the pages that the contract required us to publish. So they were threatening us to cancel the contract. So one thing happened, that we moved the editorial office to the University of Florida, and University of Florida started cost sharing. In other words, some of the costs of the editorial office were actually paid by the university at that point. And initial years were very hard work because we had to bring this journal from almost collapse to a journal that would be thriving later on. And here it is that from 2002, where we published only 496 pages and 6 issues in the whole year, that was 1 volume. In 2019, we published 11,808 pages and more than 1 volume per month, not a whole year, each month. So something else happened, that impact factor in 2002 was only 0.75, and that was one of the reasons that people were not publishing. And at that point, competition had grown. There were other journals that came up that could publish similar papers. 2004, the impact factor actually went down to 0.55. Yeah. That was because that was still based on the papers that were published before I took over as the editor. But in 2019, it was 4.608, expected to be revised up to 5.1. And so the journal had this trajectory which went up and up and up. Of course, it required a lot of hard work, but I was happy to do that because this is my passion. And so let me say this, that we started publishing a lot of special issues at that point. Those special issues were topical special issues, areas where a lot of research had been done in the past, and we wanted to sort of summarize that research. There were conference special issues. All of the Solar World Congresses had a special issue in the journal. And in addition to that, there were progress in solar energy special issues. These were the special issues where we invited well-known authors who had done a lot of work in certain areas to publish review type of papers. And that was also helping the impact factor. And I'm very happy to say that the idea that I had when we started Progress in Solar Energy Special Issues was that we will one day have a separate journal on that basis, on the idea of this progress in solar energy. And ISES is now starting in 2021 Solar Energy Advances, which is really based on the idea of progress in solar energy. So with that, I've given you a very quick history of the journal, and hopefully this journal will continue to provide the service that it has provided to the global community all these years, starting from times when there was nothing else available. Nobody really thought solar energy was going to be big at all. And yet there were many believers who felt that, yes, solar energy is our future. And so they started publishing this issue. So with that, I thank you. And during question answers, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you a whole lot, Yogi. I must say that I still see Tom Surik. You brought him up. He still has very big interest in photovoltaics, and but now is retired. And I do run into him every once in a while. Hey, Yogi, Arabella is going to kill me for this, but I'm just going to ask this question. I've been following these questions on here. There was one from Drew Gillette who came on and asked if you could say something about impact factor to say what it is.
Okay, so impact factor, in fact, up to certain times, people in our field really did not care about impact factor. The only thing they cared about was that the Solar Energy Journal was the most comprehensive and the most important journal in this field. But impact factor started, and at the time, people in computer science were really the ones that were pushing that a lot, which is based on citations in the past 3 years. And so citations are in the numerator, and it's divided by the number of articles published during those 3 years. The thing that's and so we are doing very well as far as that is concerned, because we're publishing so many articles, which is the denominator of that impact factor. But what is not fair here is that this is one journal where you will still see papers published in 1970s being referenced, or papers being published in 1980s or 1990s. That doesn't happen much in computer science type of journals. And so and the impact factor definition does not give credit to a journal where they have published seminal papers that people continue to refer to even 30, 40, 50 years after they were published. So that gives you an idea, but I think we are doing very well in that, and you can see that people want to publish in this journal. Our rejection rate is, I think, around 70%. And so when you're rejecting so many papers, people still want to publish. So that means it's the journal is considered to be very important by researchers in this area.
Thank you very, very much, Yogi. I think we will now move on, okay, to our next speaker. Our next speaker is really a career professional. with her background in policy. I know for sure that Gauri Singh was very instrumental in the formation of the National Solar Mission in India. That I always called it the Nehru Solar Mission at that time in the early 2010s, developing the policy parts of this. She has worked with various government agencies in India and in Madhya Pradesh, where I know that the largest city is Indore. This only because I was able to visit Indore last year. More recently, she has been involved with the rural development sector, something very, very important, not only in India, but in the world as well. So let me turn this over to you, Gauri, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to this discussion today. And, I remember when I was in the Ministry of Renewable Energy in India, working on the National Solar Mission that you just mentioned, Larry. Friends who are also on this discussion today, Dave, Renné, and Yogi, and ISES were really the credible source for information on solar technology and emerging trends. And since the ministry was a scientific ministry, I know that the journal was read and with a lot of reverence. So it's really good to be in this discussion today. Let me start by maybe presenting some numbers based on IRENA's Global Renewables Outlook for which we just came out this year, which would probably take us forward into what we are expecting, and not very different from what Paulo presented, but being a renewable energy agency, we're more aggressive on our numbers. So what seems to emerge from the transformation energy scenario that IRENA has developed is that by 2050, solar PV would represent the second largest power generation source, just behind wind power, generating about a quarter of the electricity. So thus becoming a very prominent generation source by 2050. And as a corollary, the solar PV industry would also need to ramp up with nearly threefold rise in yearly solar PV capacity additions by 2030 and fourfold by 2050. At the regional level, Asia would continue to drive the wave of solar PV capacity installations, and mostly China and India would continue to be the leaders in terms of total installed capacity, with a share of more than 50% by 2050. And what that means in terms of investment is that the investments in annual solar PV investments from now to 2050 are likely to reach almost $200 billion a year. So, if I look back and look at and probably give my views on what seem to be the very important policy initiatives and the policy formulations that have been able to really scale up the installation of solar. I would say that starting with feed-in tariff, which we are all aware of, and how Germany really set the whole scale up of solar into motion. But moving from there, I would say that auctions and the way they've aggregated the deployment into large solar installation have been very, very important. In fact, in India, we had done our first solar auction in 2010, and all the deployment that has happened, nearly all in the utility scale, has moved ahead with these large-scale auctions that have happened. And the latest, IRENA's latest cost report, in fact, shows that solar PV and wind cost less than keeping many of the existing coal plants in operation. Between 2010 and 2019, the global weighted average of average levelized cost of energy from solar PV fell down by 82%. And that's where you can really see this huge scale up that happened. The other policy which I think was extremely important is, and again in early 2000s, countries were looking at putting together policies which would encourage manufacturing of solar PV to the scale and of megawatts. So you'd be very excited when there was a manufacturing capacity of 20 megawatts or 50 megawatts that was getting put up. But over these years, the manufacturing policies have encouraged large-scale manufacturing and have moved from megawatts to gigawatts. And that's really changed the scale at which manufacturing now operates. And the third, I think, a very important thing that happened in solar is, and I would say the trajectory is slightly different from what happened in wind, is this very robust ecosystem comprising of independent power producers. So policies that were that really supported these independent power producers to come into being, I think that's really one of the strengths that would see us going into the next 50 years with this very strong foundation of the IPPs to take us where we need to go. So in terms of the transformation energy scenario which IRENA has brought out, it aims for 86% share for renewables in the power generation mix by 2050. Excuse me. And in terms of the total installed capacity that we foresee by 2050, it's expected that solar may actually reach something like 8,500 gigawatts, as compared to wind, which would be around 6,000 gigawatts. And what this would require in terms of policy advocacy and policy support moving ahead is to prepare the future power grids to integrate the rising shares of solar PV. I mean, I would expect that policy measures to ensure harnessing of flexibility in all segments of energy system, from power generation to transmission to distribution systems, storage, and increasingly flexible demand with demand side management and sector coupling would play a very critical and important role. And that's where I see policy heading. And if this whole transformation can bring about major socioeconomic benefits, and the solar PV industry would employ more than 18 million people by 2050, nearly 65% of them being in Asia. So I think that's what I see moving ahead into the next 30, 40, 50 years. And as we all know that with the development of solar technology and the storage, it's equally important to have enabling policies in place. And I guess that's the policy advocacy that I hope ISES would continue to do. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Gauri, very, very much. We're going to have some questions for you, but let's wait until after the speakers come on this whole thing. Our last speaker in this is a person whose description says that Skowron is a passionate advocate for 100% renewable energy future. And I wish someone would talk about a lot of more people like that, including me. I think that really is a very, very a good job title to have. Senior policy officer at the World Future Council, and supports a number of studies, country-related studies on long-term renewable energy strategies, and really to get away from the conventional look at thinking ahead. So let me turn this over to you, and I'm very interested in hearing what you're going to have to say.
Thank you very much. I do not have a presentation, so I'll just bore you with some of my talk. So we have heard the term 100% renewable energy quite often today, but what is it actually? So I'm always asking myself, what am I actually going to do with the time I have left on this planet? What will the planet look like in 50 years, in 30 years? And maybe that's also a question people 50 or 30 years ago have asked as well, when renewable energy was first really addressed and getting public attention. And the concept of 100% renewable energy refers to an energy system in which all energy use, electricity, heating and cooling, transport, is sourced from renewable energy sources. And the concept is motivated by the climate crisis, increasing air and water pollution, as well as economic and energy security concerns. It is to be noted, though, that 100% renewable energy is a more challenging goal than our nowadays often envisioned carbon neutrality. The latter is a climate mitigation target and forms really the basis of carbon dioxide removal and cross-border carbon project discussions. So why am I advocating for 100% renewable energy? To answer that question, I have to go back a bit. So I was asked to look back at the last 50 years. I'm not 50 years old, as hopefully you can see. So I'm not going as far back, and also will go through it quite quickly. So the first suggestion of a future powered by 100% renewable energy was published in 1975 by Danish physicist Ben Sørensen. Just 1 year later, the term soft energy path was coined to describe a system which is based on energy efficiency and renewables, which steadily replace centralized fossil fuel and nuclear-based systems. Fast forward to 1998. The first detailed analysis of an energy scenario with very high shares of renewables was published. That was 22 years ago. I was 11 at the time, and quite honestly, I spent most of my time watching Steve Irwin and his crocodiles, or cartoons like Captain Planet, all actually serious with a strong environmental message. And looking back, maybe that is how I also ended up as a climate energy campaigner. The first really 100% RE scenarios followed just shortly after this first analysis in 1998, with Iceland actually being the first country to globally propose a national 100 RE target. And from then on, an increasing number of scenarios and models have developed and been published, with a significant increase actually after 2009, and maybe linked up with the re-emphasized idea of a Green New Deal after the financial crisis of 2008. And around that time as well, several studies actually have shown that the system based on 100% renewables actually can match demand in every hour, year-round, in major economies such as Europe, but also in North Africa. And other papers, for instance, by the well-renowned Danish energy professor Henrik Lund, meanwhile addressed the optimal combination of renewable energy sources for countries such as Denmark. So what is the share of solar? What needs to be the share of wind to actually achieve a 100% RE supply? And quite impressively, what I found yesterday, until 2018, an estimated 188 peer-reviewed papers have been written on or with 100% renewable energy at their core. And the core message of most of these papers is actually 100% renewable energy is technically feasible and economically viable. something we have found in our work as well. And we basically did some modeling and policy analysis on 100% RE for countries in the global south, Bangladesh, Tanzania, Costa Rica, and are actually now scaling up to Nepal, Vietnam, and Uganda. So far for the history lesson. Much has changed since then. And as we have heard before, renewable energy has grown much faster than even strong renewable energy advocates have anticipated in the last 30 and 50 years. The price for PV and wind has dropped significantly. And as we have heard before, solar can become the cheapest form of energy, as the IEA just recently said. In 2019, around 61 countries had set a 100% renewable energy target in at least one end-use sector, and most of which in Africa and Asia, actually, not even Europe or the Americas, as you might expect. And 2050 is one of the most often used deadlines to achieve this target. Many of these 61 countries were announced through the Marrakesh communique at COP22 in 2016, which was actually my first COP, where the 48 countries of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, a forum comprised of some of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, announced the intention to go 100% RE by 2050 at the latest. Some countries such as Costa Rica, Iceland, or Paraguay are actually very, very close to achieving 100% renewable electricity, and as a next step, 100% renewable energy the whole year round. In addition, we have around 318 cities or regions that have stipulated 100% renewable targets on the subnational level, and over 260 companies have made commitments for 100% RE as part of the RE 100 campaign. And yet, we are nowhere near to stop the collapse of our planet and mitigate the climate crisis. To do so, renewables would actually need to grow around 6 times faster than they are doing currently. But unfortunately, there are quite some barriers which are still left. So those are actually mostly social and political rather than technologically or economical. Public participation in community energy projects can strengthen the acceptance of the energy transition, for instance. Yet, this kind of public participation is either being stalled, as in Germany, or not very well known, like in other countries. Very similarly, renewables are not provided with a level playing field, and they have to compete with heavily subsidized fossil fuels. We also have climate change deniers and the fossil fuel lobby, who, as us, are talking to the politicians, which often leads to actually political inaction and unsustainable energy consumption, outdated energy infrastructure based on fossil fuels, and financial constraints. And there will remain obstacles to the implementation of a fully renewable energy-based system. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about the existing and possible solution to address those challenges within the next 2 days at the Solar World Congress at 50. And those innovative solutions really need to address the barriers which I just stipulated. And the next step is therefore really an inclusive policy dialogue with all relevant stakeholders. And to finish off, a huge transformation lies ahead of us, lies ahead of humanity, as we are facing one of our biggest challenges. And to make this transformation towards 100% renewables a reality, everybody will need to think outside the box. The future cannot be shaped by ideas from the past, and hence new alliances need to be built. People need to become part of the transformation. New approaches need to be tried out, innovative ideas need to be facilitated, and new business models need to be developed. For this, strengthening decision makers, change makers, and building capacity across all sectors is really, really crucial. And I'm really looking forward to connect with those change makers who are at the forefront of the clean and solar powered energy revolution over the coming hours and days. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Anna. That was quite interesting. And I have lived the last 50 years or more professionally, all right? And I'm glad that the next 50 years are really in your hands on this whole thing. So this is great. I think that, am I correct? I want to be moving ahead, that we have some time now for some questions. And if I can, let me direct. This came from one of our people who were on here, and actually this will go to Gauri. And Gauri, you have a fan online on this thing who said some very nice things about your work at MNRE. Okay, someone who would like you to come back to MNRE, and also your work with solar, on the solar thermal side. And the question came that is asked to you is why the government of India is not doing anything more about solar thermal cookers.
Thank you for this question. And you know, the broad thrust that Government of India now has is at looking at solutions which can emanate from clean and electrification. So currently, as you know, you may have heard, nearly all hamlets, villages much earlier, but now even hamlets in India and the houses in the hamlets have now access to electricity. So the big thrust that one can see in Government of India now is towards moving the electricity mix towards more renewables, and moving even the cooking into electric cooking and facilitating electric cooking. So while the commercial solar cookers, the commercial solar thermal cookers are a huge hit, and you can see very large organizations, especially the ones that feed a number of people every day, have actually moved into very good and innovative solutions for around commercial solar cooking. But this hasn't happened so much in the residential space, in the small retail kind of cookers, because it still requires a lot of attention from the person who's cooking, and often you find that, you know, this is really not very amenable to people who don't have that much patience. So perhaps this kind of answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Gauri, for that. Let me see. I want to make sure that my audio is on here. Yeah, and I'll point out that following up kind of what you have said is that the Elsevier ISES Renewable Transformation Award last year went to a company that's making solar electric cookers, particularly for rural areas. This might lead, and by the way, I should acknowledge these the questions so that what we want to do is thank Yannick Palta McGilligan for that particular question, which leads into another one that has appeared here, and that is along the same lines. It probably was really meant for Paulo, who I think is not with us, but I think Dave Renné might be able to answer this, and I think that the address so far on solar energy and renewable energy have discussed a lot about solar PV, and the question and the potential and scope. But the question comes is, why, Dave, I'm going to give this to you, why solar thermal didn't take up as much as solar PV? Part of this, I think, was just answered by Gauri, but maybe you can address this as well. Why there isn't more solar thermal in our portfolio?
Well, I think the short answer is the lower costs of photovoltaics, but that hasn't always been the case. And of course, many people who got involved in solar back in the 60s and 70s mainly remember it as solar thermal, solar water heating. There's a huge surge of solar water heating systems after the Arab oil crisis in the early 70s. And these systems were quite popular in many parts of the world. They're still popular today in many parts of the world. And there's also higher temperature solar thermal applications that are quite effective around the world. But quite honestly, the costs of solar PV had just dropped so much that in many cases, for example, it's probably less expensive to put in a PV system and power a heat pump system to provide your hot water than it is to put a direct solar water heating system in place. This isn't true everywhere. And I think as Paulo mentioned, the heating sector is still very, very largely carbon intensive, and there are significant opportunities for solar thermal, especially in industrial heat processes, but even in off-grid remote areas for domestic use. And I think the potential is still there. And we just need to continue working, as I have for many years, with the IEA Solar Heating and Cooling Program, which is really an excellent place to focus the work that's being done in the entire solar thermal area. I think their opportunities still exist. We're seeing many successful projects, not only solar heat for industrial processing, but also solar heat, high temperature heat to produce electricity. And if you have the right solar resources, these systems can be very cost effective in the location that they're installed. So I think the short answer then right now is that PV costs have gotten to be quite low, and but that solar thermal technologies are still viable options for many markets around the world.
Thanks a lot, Dave. This kind of leads into another question that came in from Sean Snyder that maybe I can even answer on this thing. You took it from the 1970s. This question says that in the 60s, what was the primary motivator for interest in solar energy? And I think that there were probably some interest in the solar thermal parts of this, mainly looking at some applications, some cookers and things like that. But on the PV side, the motivator was very simple: space. So that was our first frontier for solar PV and our first major markets. With the launching of Vanguard, the first solar powered satellite, showed that the stuff worked. And certainly in the 1960s, the space markets became the motivator for PV, and the building of that first industry in photovoltaics was built around space.
Kaz, let me give a comment on this also. As I was reviewing the early part of Solar Energy Journal, Farrington Daniels was the prime motivator for starting the Association for Applied Solar Energy, because he had worked in the nuclear part, and he just did not like what he had done. I don't want to go into that history, because he was part of the Manhattan Project, that developed the bomb that was thrown on in Japan. So he wanted to do something good in his life, and thought solar energy was the way to do it. And so he started that, and the first conference was held in Phoenix, Arizona. But he found out that people around the world, and that included people in France who had the solar furnace at that time, they were already melting metal with that solar furnace. And then people in India who had already developed solar thermal collectors and some drying applications and so on, and some people in Israel working on these things, and later on in other countries. But the point is that there were these people around the world who were sort of visionaries and thought that our future is solar energy, and they started working at that time. And so the association then brought those people together, and they started communicating with each other, and with that communication the work increased. So that's the history in terms of the solar thermal side, and you gave the motivation for photovoltaics.
Great on this whole thing. So, hey, listen, it also came up here as a question that I got over my phone. This is, I think, for Dave and maybe for Geoff. And the question came up is that this is the Solar World Conference 50, but both of you mentioned the history going back to the 1950s to 1954, 1955. What are you doing? Just dropping the first part of the of what the ISES history might be and starting it in 1970? Unquote.
Good question. And I had hoped to explain this in my talk, but maybe I wasn't very clear. The person who asked the question is absolutely right. There was a lot happening in the 50s. But what happened in 1970 was what was called the first Solar World Congress. That was held in Melbourne, Australia in March of 1970. And that was the same year, and that was organized by the Australian and New Zealand section, and also, and they invited the US Solar Energy Society representatives over there and to organize that conference or Congress. So the brainstorming that our board members had a couple of years ago was to how can we commemorate the 50th anniversary, because this year would be the 50th anniversary of that Congress, and we decided to have a special event. We originally had planned to hold it in Melbourne at this very same time in conjunction with another conference going on there right now. But of course, that we had to change our plans several months ago and make this a virtual conference. But so the idea was just to celebrate the 50th anniversary of that first Solar World Congress. But indeed, the history goes back before that, and I think the history of ISES started 16 years before that, and we just wanted to make sure we highlighted that as well.
Let me add something to that. Up till that point, it was the Solar Energy Society, which started as Association for Applied Solar Energy, and then Solar Energy Society, and then it became International Solar Energy Society, I think around 1970. And the office headquarters of the society moved to Australia at that time. So it used to be in Phoenix, Arizona, actually at the Arizona State University. And so it moved to Australia. And so in other words, it became much bigger, and the Congress was called Solar World Congress instead of whatever the name was before. So all of those things I think just changed the scale of what the society was and what the Congress was. And so that's what is being celebrated now, because 50 years have passed since that time.
Thank you both for putting in those answers, and I'm suppose someone will tell me when our time is up. But this next one is an interesting question. It comes that India is blessed with solar radiation, and with the new policy of having 450 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. That's the new policy, I think. Is the policy in India to radiation and to meet these goals? And if not, why not? This is for you, Gauri. I should have said that while I was asking the question.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Could you just repeat the last bit? I missed that.
Yeah,
so after the 450 gigawatts.
Yeah, the question really is the policy in India now strong enough to meet these goals and to capture all this available solar radiation that that India is blessed with?
Thanks, Larry, and thank you for the question. The 450 gigawatt that we've heard the Prime Minister of India speak about is a vision, and it's an intent, pretty much drawing what where India needs to go. Right now, the short-term goal is to reach 175 gigawatts till 2022. And the roadmap for being able to reach there is pretty much crystallized. But in order to reach the 450 gigawatts, which I think is a really strong vision, a broad roadmap needs to be put together. There are many elements of policy that exist, but these need to actually come together as a whole. So there's a strong policy on encouraging manufacturing, a policy that brings together the thrust on making the rural and agricultural base in India move into solar electrification. So the pumping and the irrigation needs all moves into solar electrification. And also the end use sectors like transport and the more the industries, the heavy industries. The policies exist, but I think what's probably needed, given this very strong vision that has come through, is that these need to now come together in a much more holistic manner to be able to all move together to get to that vision. Thank you.
Yeah, Neil has a comment on this, by the way, saying that India is not investing enough in solar thermal, and this is especially affecting a lot of the suppliers and small companies that are struggling. So maybe there's some added attention has to come to that. This next question I have is addressed at everybody, and the question is what's your answer to the people who claim that renewable energies are not really green? I don't know who, maybe this would be a very, very good one for our one person who looks ahead. So Ms. Skowron, I wondered if you could handle that first.
Sure. It really depends on whom you are talking to. I actually had this discussion in the train the other day. So, I mean, quite frankly, but what is the alternative if you're saying, well, renewable energy is not really green? Are you still going with nuclear energy, who uses a lot of materials and has the problem of, well, where do you store the waste? Or are you going with coal or oil, which uses materials, increases air pollution? So what is really the other option? I think, and that is a bit further away from that question, but I think in our field, we are really trying to cover all aspects. And there is an issue with rare earth materials, and that is an issue which needs to be addressed. But a lot of people are not interested in how we are addressing that. They are just hearing, yes, there is an issue. So maybe depending on whom we are talking to, you might just go with, well, what is the alternative? Coal, basically destroying your health. Nuclear energy, Chernobyl. So yeah.
Let me add something to that, this discussion. I think the question is coming from whoever is asking that you are using materials in renewable energy systems, and those materials, energy is being used to produce them and so on, and that could be maybe non-renewable energy that's being used. But one thing that Anna just mentioned, you compare it with the alternatives, and then it's certainly greener, much greener than the alternatives, right? The second is that it's becoming greener every day as research is taking place. I'll give you one example. In the 1980s, a very famous environmental scientist, H.T. Odum, who came up with the idea of emergy, that is the embedded energy. His analysis showed in 1980s, you will never recover the energy from a photovoltaic panel that went into producing the panel. And so he was saying, oh, forget about doing any additional research in photovoltaics. And then I was on a panel with him where he repeated that in the 1995. And at that point, he said the same thing. And I said, Dr. Odum, you were right in the 1980s, but I'm glad we did not listen to you. We kept doing research. And today, at that point in 1995, the energy payback period for photovoltaics was less than 5 years. And today it's less than 1 year. And the lifetime of those panels is 20, 30 years and maybe even longer. So the point is, with research, the technologies are improving to the point where these renewable energy technologies, whether it's the windmills or whether it's the photovoltaics or the solar thermal panels and so on, that the energy used in producing them is much less than what you will produce from them over their lifetime. So yeah, they're not 100% green, but the alternative is much worse.
Yeah, but thank the two of you. Also, I think there's something that's coming in here is the manufacturers and developers have become much smarter. They brought in the circular economy, brought in recycling, and so that that many of the materials are coming back into the stream for these renewable energy technologies. I laughed when you made reference to coal and everything. Anna, not too long ago, someone from the Department of Energy, maybe about a year ago, as you know, the U.S. had a policy for a while now of looking more toward coal on this, and called me. He was a renewables person there and said that he was being pressured in photovoltaics to find some use for coal. And my answer to him was that I didn't think it had the right band gap, so there was no place in our thing for that. So let's see. I should have looked and see if there are some other questions on here. On this, I think that we're coming to near the end of our time. Here we go. So that this might come to a couple people, Anna and certainly Gauri, is what is the solar energy plan for South Asia for the next 10 years? You know, South Asia now is becoming not only a big market, but also a big part of in Southeast Asia, certainly of the manufacturing for a number of renewable energy technologies. So I don't know, Anna, would you want to handle this first on what the solar energy plan might be for South Asia?
Yes, I can give some more or less overviewing answer to that, and I'm sure some of you can dig deeper into that. But what I have seen in my work, and the World Future Council is basically developing national 100% renewable energy strategies. And as I said before, we have done so, for instance, in Bangladesh. What I see in South and also Southeast Asia is actually that solar has to compete with a massive coal lobby. And most of the times coal is not even consumed in the country, or also for that matter oil, but actually exported. And depending on the country, South and Southeast Asia have many islands, so they are very, very vulnerable to the climate crisis as well. And we really need some innovative technologies here. In Bangladesh, for instance, we were putting a lot of emphasis on floating solar and integrated floating solar homes, which might help a country which basically is flooded 1/3 of the country is flooded for a couple of months each year. So what we need to get out of our thinking to try to really harvest the abundant energy resources we have in the region, and especially South Asia has a lot of those. Again, Bangladesh, for instance, it's possible to power Bangladesh solely on solar and wind power, not using any kind of agricultural land or natural parks. So it's possible, but in those special cases, we need to invest more time and research into innovative technology concepts.
Do you have something you can add also to this?
I just want to probably add to what Anna just said, is that one thing that really was very stark during the COVID crisis is the need to have a relook at the supply chains. And that's possibly going to be a very major driver for manufacturing to pick up in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And I do believe that this is an opportunity that's going to be fairly big, both in terms of the jobs that it will create, but also maybe as an answer to the very strong oil and coal lobbies that do exist there.
Thank you. Our next is from Hafiz Mohammed, who asked a question specifically about ISES, but I think goes beyond this as well, is that what about the policies of ISES about developing countries and the SWC 50? What will they decide about developing countries for the progression of renewables? Maybe Dave is the person on this. Does ISES have such policies?
I'm not sure if I would call it policies or programs. I mean, we obviously have programs that reach out to both developed as well as developing countries, and we certainly have many members in developing countries, and we occasionally hold our conferences or congresses in developing countries. I think, you know, we certainly recognize the need still for there's many countries, especially in South Asia and in Africa, that still are not yet connected to the grid or have reliable electricity supply anyway. It doesn't mean being connected to the grid, but means having reliable electricity supply. And we definitely have programs that address that issue, and we have certainly members of ISES that are working in that area. One of them is our introducer on this panel. That's Geoff Stapleton. And so Geoff has been doing a lot of work in developing countries to help enhance and advance the development of solar energy technologies to unconnect or to unserved areas. And maybe Geoff and he's got an active career in that area. Maybe he could elaborate a little bit more as to how he sees ISES involved in that as well. So I'll turn it over to Geoff if you're there, Geoff.
Yep, I'm here. Just hold on. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm worried about my internet. Look, yeah, that's correct. And yeah, I've worked in developing countries with PV since the 90s. There are other people I know been working in since the 70s. So Dave's correct that we don't necessarily have a complete ISES policy on developing countries, but it is always raised at our meetings and we make sure it gets included. And what I was going to be saying later on when we talk about the booklet and the museum, we actually have a section that's just dedicated to PV in developing countries. We'll expand it in the future to cover the solar thermal, but we have identified that, and we also identify the other agencies who are doing a lot of work in that area, which is IRENA and Light and Global, and even associations like ARE and GOGLA. So we all try to have a close working relationship with all those working in the developing countries. And I can do the advertising. Session 3, I actually present on some figures on the electrification rate and what solar has done in the past 10 to 20 years in that area.
Thanks, Geoff. There is actually a comment on this, and I like this because it comes from Jenny Gregory, a person who I met some time ago, not a long time ago, but some time ago. And she also points out that ISES does have significant programs in the development of renewable energy in development countries, that actually this was an ISES 2000 initiative. So maybe we could all go back and read our materials about this. And I certainly want to say hi to Jenny. It's really nice to hear from you. We have, let's see, policies did that. This came from Drew. I'm having a hard time understanding this. As with landlines in developing countries have an opportunity to bypass archaic technology. That's a good thing, that the markets are open so that the opportunities are greater in these areas. And in fact, I think that ISES also recently, because they have this connection now with the ISA, with the International Solar Alliance on this, which is reaching out a lot into Asia and into Africa on developing renewable energy options, including helping countries develop roadmaps and education programs into these areas as well. So I think ISES is probably a lot more active in the developing countries areas than we had thought. So does anybody else see any questions here that I have missed on this whole thing?
I think we want to leave a few minutes for Geoff to give us some closing comments.
I was, oh, that's right too. But I was looking at my instructions from Arabella, who was saying that we do have the time for the closing comments, but I think we're to our end of our questions, and I certainly would like to thank all the speakers who came in on this whole thing. Also, the audience who provided a rather good list of inquiries into what was said and what it, really most of them projected to see what our future would be. And I'm always think I look back and let me see if I turn on my webcam as I finish up here on this thing, because you know things have changed so much that I used to do ties and that the new fashion, of course, now are face masks. So no longer do I do ties and scarves, that I'm in the part of doing face masks at this time. This is the ISES face mask, okay, for 2020 on this. So, you know, we look back 50 years and looking forward 50 years in this, you know, time sometimes puts a halo on some things that we have done, some things in the past, okay, that maybe aren't halos, okay, but a lot of things that have had halos in this time really do exist, but the real halo for us, I think, will be 100% renewables future. So let me turn this now back to Geoff, and I want to thank everyone here for their patience with me.
Well, actually, on behalf of ISES and also the organising committee, I particularly want to thank Larry Kazmerski for being the moderator this afternoon. Well, I should really say it's almost midnight his time. And then also all the speakers, Klaus, Vajen, it's also Yogi, we have a reasonable hour, she's mid-afternoon, Paulo, Frankl, and Skowron, at least they're now about 8 AM in the morning. So as you can see, it's a truly international conference working around the world. So Before we finish up, I just want to launch two aspects of this also with this event, SWC 50, and that is the initial launch of the booklet in the museum. For the 50th anniversary of ISES back in 2005, they published a 2-volume set of books which gave the history of the International Solar Energy Society. The organising committee, during the planning with many meetings, decided that we should also hold something for these 50 years and develop a booklet, to commemorate the fact that it's 50 years since the first international conference was held in Melbourne. And we also wanted to have the booklet so it actually had a global reach, because at the time, we knew that there'd be those who could not make it to Melbourne. We just didn't know when we were making those statements that the end result, none of us would make it to Melbourne. Jenny for long day booklet for studies of store vision. Is also the case we do look back. So what we have in this booklet, there's been many booklets written about different historic aspects of the industry. They've gone into great detail. What we've decided to do is do a snapshot. Just put them down in highlighted points. What has happened in the past? So those can get a quick picture of how the different parts of the industry have developed. So we cover ISIS, yes, at 55. We cover EV industry, which is the 50s on. We look at solar, water, and air, concentrating solar panel, solar architect, and particularly for the bike, we do have a section on the different dates, what has happened in one of them. There's a call for people in an industry prior to 95. That is 25 years ago since this event, 25 years ago after the first conference. It is ISES' way of acknowledging that many people have made this industry what it is today. So over 280 people have submitted their and ISES and SWC organised committee recognised that listed in the book are just again a snapshot of the thousands who did contribute prior to 95. They're all shown in the decade that they started. We also have stories of the partners, the supporters, some of the ISES institutes, and some of the national sections. But the booklet does close with a summary of the future of renewable energy, and particularly as governments deal with the dual crisis of providing economic stimulus to address the COVID-19 crisis in the short term and significant threats of climate change in the line of business in which ISES takes to focus its work included in this story. The SWC 50 celebration actually continues until SWC 2021. And the booklet will be updated in the second edition. Originally, it was also planned to have a historic exhibition in Melbourne once the conference went virtual, and we actually made the decision back on the 4th of March, which was very early in the pandemic. It was decided that another legacy of this celebration is the ISES feature. This online museum follows a similar line to the book. However, it has different flaws on the different technologies, including a timeline that was developed by or today, whatever time of the world you're in. So is now a part of this.
Geoff,
We've had a number of people say They've been
Geoff?
collecting things over the years, and this is,
I think you're breaking up a lot.
yes. Okay, I will just hold on.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Yep. Okay, I'll mute those. Now I've gone to the old technology, which is called a landline. Things come back. So the online museum follows a similar line to the book, but it's going to be a permanent. And the ISES is going to have an ongoing committee that oversees continuously updating. Both of these will be available on the website within the next 24 to 48 hours. Due to the time differences around the world, with people working in Germany, Australia, and the US, it's been making it hard to actually have a final date on getting everything together. Most importantly, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all the members of the various committees, the technical experts, and of course those at ISES headquarters who put the many hours in putting the booklet and museum together. It's also important that I also acknowledge again the partners who have helped support this event, which is GCS in Australia, NREL from USA, and gold partners were Smart Energy from Turkey. So I would like to now bring this session to the close. I'd like to thank all the members So again, I want to thank the moderators and speakers, and thanks to all the attendees who have sat through these 2 hours. Please check for follow-up messages from ISES about upcoming activities related to SWC 50 and other activities. Also, please consider donating. Your support of SWC 50 helped make SWC 50 the Century of Solar Conference, Museum and Booklet, as well as all other ISES activities possible. And please remember there are 5 other more sessions over the next 2-day period. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much to everybody. We are now going to close the session. Thank you for attending. And please remember, as Geoff mentioned, there are 5 more sessions coming up and you can still register for those. And this is the final goodbye from the ISES HQ in Freiburg. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.